The morning sun cast long shadows across the concrete parking lot of Riverside Auto Center when 12-year-old Emma Chen walked up to the gleaming black Bentley Continental that had been sitting broken for 3 days. The car belonged to Marcus Wellington, a tech billionaire whose empire spanned 3 continents. But right now, he was just another frustrated customer watching his $300,000 vehicle refuse to start. What Marcus didn't know was that the small girl approaching his car carried more than just a worn toolbox and grease-stained overalls. Around her neck, barely visible beneath her faded jacket, hung a pair of military dog tags that would soon reveal a connection spanning decades and continents. A story of sacrifice that would change both their lives forever. 3 master mechanics had already declared the Bentley's electrical system beyond repair. The diagnostic computers showed cascading failures throughout the vehicle's complex network. But Emma Chen wasn't looking at computer screens or technical manuals. She was listening to something else entirely. The subtle electrical whispers that her grandfather had taught her to hear before his deployment to Afghanistan changed everything. Marcus stood nearby, barking orders into his phone about missing a crucial board meeting that could determine the fate of his latest acquisition. His assistant had already called every luxury car service within 100 miles. The nearest replacement vehicle was 4 hours away, and his private jet sat useless on the tarmac without ground transportation to the airport. That's when Emma quietly approached the lead mechanic, a gruff man named Tony Rodriguez, who'd been working on high-end vehicles for 25 years. "Excuse me," she said, her voice barely audible over the sounds of air tools and radio chatter. Tony looked down at her with the kind of patient smile adults reserve for children who don't understand complexity. "That's sweet, kiddo, but this isn't a bicycle with a flat tire." Emma didn't smile back. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, listening to something only she could hear. "The main electrical harness has a ground fault in the junction box behind the dashboard. The computer systems are getting inconsistent voltage, which is why your diagnostics keep showing different error codes." The shop fell silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of traffic on the interstate. Tony's smile faded as he processed what this 12-year-old had just said. She'd used technical language that would impress electrical engineers at Bentley's factory in Crewe. Marcus stopped his phone conversation mid-sentence, his attention caught by the sudden quiet in the garage. He watched as Emma walked around the Bentley, her small hands tracing invisible patterns in the air above the hood, as if she could see the electrical current flowing through the vehicle's nervous system. "Show me," Tony said finally, his skepticism warring with desperate curiosity. 3 days of failed diagnostics had left him questioning his own expertise. What did he have to lose by listening to a child who spoke like she'd memorized the vehicle's electrical schematic? Emma approached the Bentley's driver's side and popped the hood with practiced efficiency. Her movements were confident, methodical, nothing like the hesitant exploration of someone unfamiliar with luxury vehicles. She reached into the engine bay and began tracing wire harnesses with the focused intensity of a surgeon following arteries. "The ground fault is here," she announced, pointing to a connection point deep within the electrical system. "You can't see it from the outside, but if you test for a continuity between this point and the chassis ground, you'll find an open circuit. Tony grabbed his multimeter and followed Emma's guidance, probing the connection she'd identified. The meter's display confirmed what she'd predicted: a complete loss of electrical continuity that explained every symptom they'd encountered. Marcus asked, stepping closer to observe this remarkable child who'd solved a problem that had stumped 3 professionals. Emma's hand moved unconsciously to her neck, touching the dog tags beneath her jacket. My grandfather taught me to listen to electrical systems before he deployed. The mention of deployment caused something to shift in Marcus's expression. His business success had insulated him from most of the world's harsher realities. But military service was different. That represented sacrifice and service to something larger than profit margins. Marcus asked, his voice carrying a note of respect that hadn't been there before. Staff Sergeant Michael Chen, Army Corps of Engineers, Emma replied with quiet pride. He specialized in field electrical systems, keeping communication equipment running in combat zones. The past tense in her voice created an uncomfortable silence in the garage. Tony busied himself with testing the electrical connection Emma had identified, while Marcus found himself looking at this child with new understanding. The repair is actually simple, Emma continued, her professional demeanor returning as she focused on the technical problem. You need to clean the corrosion from the terminal and apply dielectric grease to prevent future oxidation. Tony shook his head in amazement as he began the repair procedure Emma had outlined. In 25 years of working on these cars, I've never seen anyone diagnose an electrical fault that quickly. Grandfather said test equipment tells you what's happening, but listening tells you why it's happening, Emma explained. As Tony worked to implement Emma's solution, Marcus found himself studying this remarkable child more carefully. Her knowledge was extraordinary, but there was something else about her, a maturity that seemed to come from experiences beyond her years. Emma, he said carefully, you mentioned your grandfather's last deployment. Emma's fingers tightened around the dog tags beneath her jacket. He didn't come home. IED attack on his convoy 8 months ago. The weight of that loss settled over the garage like a heavy blanket. Marcus felt something twist in his chest, a recognition of sacrifice that his privileged life had rarely forced him to confront. I'm sorry, he said quietly, and for once, his words carried no calculation, no business agenda, just simple human acknowledgement of profound loss. He saved a lot of lives during his deployments, Emma said, her voice steady despite the pain Marcus could see in her eyes. The engineers he trained kept communication systems running long after he was gone. Tony's voice cut through the emotional moment as the Bentley's engine roared to life, all dashboard warning lights extinguished, electrical systems functioning perfectly. Emma, that was brilliant. Marcus looked at his watch, realizing that this 12-year-old had not only solved an impossible mechanical problem, but had done it in time for him to make his crucial meeting. His private jet could still depart on schedule, the board meeting could proceed as planned, and a deal worth hundreds of millions of dollars remained viable. But as he prepared to thank Emma and rush to the airport, Marcus noticed something that made him pause. The toolbox she'd brought was well maintained, but obviously old, the kind passed down through generations. Her clothes were clean but showed signs of careful mending. The bicycle she'd ridden to the shop was functional but far from new. This brilliant child, whose technical knowledge had just saved his business deal, was clearly living in circumstances far different from his own privileged world. "Emma," Marcus said, pulling out his wallet, "I can't thank you enough for what you've done." Emma shook her head politely. "I didn't fix it. Mr. Rodriguez did." "But without your diagnosis, the car would still be broken," Marcus insisted. "Grandfather taught me that helping people is what you do because it's right, not because you get paid for it," Emma replied, with the simple moral clarity that comes from being raised by someone who understood service. Marcus stared at this remarkable child, recognizing something profound in her words. In his world of corporate acquisitions and profit maximization, he'd forgotten that some actions were motivated by principles rather than compensation. Tony finished securing the electrical connections and closed the Bentley's hood with a satisfied thump. "All systems green, Mr. Wellington." Marcus nodded his thanks, but his attention remained focused on Emma. He asked, "Follow grandfather's path," Emma said without hesitation. "Army Corps of Engineers, just like him." The certainty in her voice impressed Marcus, but it also concerned him. Here was a child with extraordinary technical abilities, living in circumstances that might limit her opportunities to develop those gifts fully. Marcus looked at the Bentley, now running smoothly thanks to Emma's intervention, then at the child whose knowledge and character had impressed him more than any business associate he'd met in years. A decision began forming in his mind, one that would either be the best investment he'd ever made or the most meaningful mistake of his corporate career. "Emma," he said, "before I leave for my meeting, I'd like to ask you something important. Based on the reference videos and guides provided, here's part 2 of the script continuing from where the first part left off." The morning sun blazed mercilessly through the classroom windows of West Valley Elementary as Emma Chen sat in the back row, trying to focus on Mrs. Patterson's math lesson while her mind wandered to the Bentley's electrical schematic she'd been memorizing. The numbers on the blackboard blurred together as she calculated voltage drops and amperage flows, her small fingers unconsciously tracing circuit patterns on her desk. Mrs. Patterson's voice cut through her technical reverie like a sharp blade. Emma blinked, refocusing on the board where a simple multiplication problem waited. 42, she answered automatically, having solved it in seconds while still thinking about ground fault isolation procedures. Mrs. Patterson smiled with surprise. "That's correct." "Math is just patterns," Emma replied quietly, earning curious glances from her classmates. "Like electrical circuits." During a recess, Emma sat alone under the oak tree in the schoolyard, sketching modifications to the Bentley's wiring harness in her notebook. She'd identified 3 potential improvement points that could increase system efficiency by nearly 8%. The other children played kickball and climbed monkey bars, their laughter echoing across the playground. But Emma found solace in her diagrams. The voice belonged to Tyler Morrison, an 8th grader who'd made it his mission to torment younger students. He snatched Emma's notebook before she could react, holding it high above her reach. "Give it back," Emma said firmly, standing to face him despite being half his size. Tyler squinted at the complex diagrams. "What is this junk?" He tossed the notebook toward the nearby trash can. Emma lunged forward, catching her notebook just before it hit the ground. As she straightened up, Tyler grabbed her grandfather's dog tags, yanking them hard enough to snap the chain. Emma cried, watching them scatter across the asphalt. "Tough luck, freak," Tyler sneered, deliberately stepping on one of the tags as he walked away. Emma knelt carefully, gathering the precious metal pieces. One tag bore a deep scratch from Tyler's boot, marring the surface that had once reflected her grandfather's courage under fire in Afghanistan. She cradled them in her small palms, feeling tears sting her eyes for the first time in months. That afternoon, Emma walked home slowly, taking the long route past Wellington Automotive's main service center. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she could see technicians working on luxury vehicles with equipment that cost more than most people's homes. The contrast between their pristine facility and her grandfather's cramped garage workshop seemed to highlight the impossible distance between her current life and her dreams. Marcus Wellington stood in his office overlooking the service floor, reviewing quarterly reports when his assistant knocked. "Sir, there's someone here to see you." Marcus looked up with interest. Few people had access to information about his personal vehicle maintenance. Instead of the automotive professional he expected, a small girl entered his office, carrying a worn toolbox that seemed almost too heavy for her slight frame. She wore the same faded jeans and patched jacket from their earlier encounter. But now he noticed details he'd missed. The careful way she moved, the intelligent alertness in her dark eyes, the quiet dignity that reminded him of soldiers he'd known. "Mr. She placed 3 small electronic components on his mahogany desk. "I found them in your engine bay." Marcus examined the parts with growing amazement. They were indeed aftermarket components, poorly manufactured and incorrectly installed. "The symptom pattern was wrong for a simple ground fault," Emma explained. "The electrical signature suggested component-level interference rather than wiring problems." Marcus studied this remarkable child with new respect. "Emma, isn't it?" Emma's hand moved unconsciously to her neck, where her grandfather's broken chain usually hung. "My grandfather taught me." Marcus noticed her gesture and the absence of what had clearly been important jewelry. Emma's composure wavered slightly. "It got broken at school today." She trailed off, unwilling to sound like she was complaining. Emma hesitated, then carefully withdrew the damaged dog tags from her pocket. Marcus examined them with the reverence of someone who understood their significance. The scratched surface still bore her grandfather's name, rank, and service number. "Staff Sergeant Chen," Marcus read aloud. He looked up at Emma. "2 tours," Emma said quietly. "He died in a roadside bomb attack while helping evacuate wounded soldiers." Marcus felt something shift in his chest. He'd known combat veterans, had hired several in his businesses, and he recognized the particular weight of inherited sacrifice that Emma carried. "He was the best person I ever knew," Emma replied simply. "He taught me that fixing broken things wasn't just about making them work again." Marcus set the dog tags down carefully. "Emma, I'd like to ask you something." Emma shook her head. "I've been working on electrical systems since I was 8. Grandpa said I had a gift for understanding how electrons flow through circuits." Emma straightened with quiet determination. "I want to design electrical systems that save lives, like the ones Grandpa worked on in Afghanistan." Marcus studied her for a long moment, seeing not just exceptional talent, but the moral framework that would guide its use. "I hope so," Emma whispered. "Intelligence isn't just about what you know," Marcus said gently. "It's about how you use what you know to help others." Emma looked up at him with eyes that seemed far too wise for 12 years old. "Is that why you came to find me?" Marcus smiled, recognizing the same moral clarity that had driven her grandfather's service. "Partly." Emma picked up her grandfather's dog tags, holding them with careful reverence. "Mr. Wellington, would you be willing to help me fix these?" "I'd be honored," Marcus replied, "but I have a better idea. Let me introduce you to someone who specializes in military memorabilia restoration." As Emma gathered her courage to ask the question that had been weighing on her mind all day, Marcus's phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID and held up one finger. Emma waited patiently as Marcus spoke with someone about educational funding for gifted students from underserved communities. When he ended the call, Marcus turned back to Emma with an expression of barely contained excitement. Emma blinked in surprise. "It's a program for exceptionally gifted young people. They study advanced engineering concepts, work with graduate students, and get exposure to cutting-edge research." Emma's heart began racing. "But I'm only 12. "They don't usually require conventional backgrounds," Marcus corrected. "They require exceptional talent and the character to use it wisely." Emma stared at him, hardly daring to hope. "Emma, in 30 years of business, I've met perhaps 5 people with your combination of technical intuition and moral clarity." Emma carefully placed her grandfather's dog tags back in her pocket, drawing strength from their familiar weight. "It would be an essential step in that direction," Marcus confirmed. "But Emma, there's something else you need to understand. This opportunity isn't charity." Emma nodded slowly, processing the magnitude of what he was offering. "June, that gives us 6 months to prepare." Emma looked around Marcus's luxurious office, noting the engineering awards on his walls, the photos with prominent scientists and inventors, the evidence of a life spent building and creating. "Mr. Wellington, why are you helping me?" Marcus leaned back in his chair, considering how to explain something he wasn't entirely sure he understood himself. Emma shook her head. "I was getting mediocre grades and thinking about what video game I wanted to play next. I had every advantage: private schools, tutors, unlimited resources, and I was squandering all of it." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "But more than that, you have something I didn't have at your age, and frankly, something many adults never develop: a clear sense of purpose. You know why your skills matter." Emma absorbed this quietly. "Grandpa used to say that gifts weren't given to us for our own benefit." "Your grandfather was a wise man," Marcus agreed. Emma stood up, extending her small hand toward Marcus. "Mr. Wellington, I accept your offer." Marcus shook her hand, struck by the firmness of her grip and the resolution in her voice. "Emma, I don't think you're capable of wasting anything." As Emma prepared to leave, Marcus called out one more time. "Emma, there's one more thing. The scholarship program I mentioned, it's not just for you. We're planning to identify other young people with exceptional talents who need opportunities." Emma's eyes lit up with understanding. "You want me to help identify other kids like me?" "Exactly." Emma smiled for the first time since Tyler had broken her grandfather's chain. "I'd love to help." As Emma walked home that evening, her grandfather's dog tags safely tucked in her pocket and her mind buzzing with possibilities, she felt something she hadn't experienced since her grandfather's death. Genuine hope for the future. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, and for the first time in months, Emma allowed herself to imagine a life where her gifts could truly make a difference. The next morning would bring new challenges, new lessons, and new opportunities to prove that extraordinary talent could emerge from the most unexpected places. But tonight, a 12-year-old girl with calloused hands and unlimited potential fell asleep dreaming of electrical systems that could save lives and honor the memory of a soldier who had taught her that the greatest gift anyone could give was service to others. The story was just beginning, but already it was clear that Emma Chen would never be just another gifted child. She would be something far more rare and valuable, a person whose technical brilliance was matched only by her determination to use it in service of something greater than herself.